be lost. So I will distribute that information again, and then the question being posed is how do we address that, e.g. The arrival of light rail and possibly a pedestrianisation plan. That summarises it.
Yep. Yeah, that'd be really good.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I mean, the other related issue around removing carbon is around electrification of vehicles generally. That goes to more plug-in facilities. So if we're going to have a report back that is dealing with particulate emission, let's cover off a few bases.
Yeah, we're dealing with the city centre. It's the Queen Street Valley.
I understand that.
And of course, look, we'll pick it up. Thank you. Okay, we'll now go to item 9, and this is a proposed plan change to address some challenges we've had in the special character overlays and some conflicts there. And we will hear an introduction from Manager of Plans and Places, John Dogood. John, would you like to introduce your colleagues?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the committee. So Ian Smallburn, General Manager of Resource Consents, and Phil Reid, Auckland-wide Manager in Plans and Places. I'll be very brief and then hand over to Phil initially, and then perhaps we'll have some questions and answers, and then we'll hand over to Ian to talk to the issues as well. So a memo went to all councillors and local board chairs, I think local board members and the members of the IMSB, in August from Ian, explaining that we had an Environment Court declaration on an interpretation of the unitary plan, which went against the way that we had been interpreting the plan for a period of time. We had legal advice that our interpretation was robust, but the court decided that an alternative interpretation was the correct one, and essentially what that means is that the plan is not really being read as it was intended by the council during the course of the hearings on the unitary plan, the independent hearings panel, and the council's decision on the unitary plan. I guess were based on a different interpretation to the interpretation that the court has now confirmed is the correct one. And this all relates to special character areas, the historic suburbs of Auckland, identified in the unitary plan through the special character overlay. And most of the properties in this area are sitting in our single house zone, although some are in a different zone. And the declaration is all about the relationship between the zone that the properties sit in and the special character overlay in the unitary plan. And in short, the declaration from the Environment Court is that both sets of provisions apply, even when they're dealing with the same issue. For example, height in relation to boundary controls appear both in the zone and the overlay. It was always our intention that the overlay would prevail or take precedence over the zone in that situation, but that's not how the court is saying the unitary plan is drafted. So we are here today to really talk to a proposed plan change that we would like a decision from you to proceed with the drafting and finalisation of that plan change. So Phil will talk to a little bit more detail. Thanks.
Right.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Through the chair. So maybe just set context, just to remind everybody about the special character overlay. So this does apply in a large number of different locations around the region. So we do have it in places like Helensville, down to Hill Park within Manurewa, and then predominantly within the Isthmus and the older suburbs of the North Shore, Birkenhead Point, North Cape Point and Devonport. Now, the special character overlay probably is a little bit different to many other overlays in that it's got a lot of different rules within it. It's got a primary focus on the actual built form rather than the uses that can occur within the overlay. But as a result of a lot of the different standards and rules that are in the overlay, you find yourself in a situation where you've got mimicked provisions, the provision which sits within the underlying zone, and it also sits within the overlay. And unfortunately within the plan, in many cases, we don't have a clause that actually clarifies which of the two would prevail. And so John has spoken to the height to boundary example, and it's one of a few of where you're faced with, as preparing a resource consent or processing a resource consent, two different rules that actually apply. One which is slightly more enabling for the special character, which is a 3 metre and 45-degree angle, and one which is slightly more restrictive, being a 2.5 and 45-degree angle for the underlying zone. one of which you can consider the amenity of the neighbours, one of which you can't. So it can, as you can understand, make things quite complex for processing resource consents. Now, through the process of appearing before the independent hearing panel, Council had attempted to actually clarify that difference by identifying which parts of the special character the standards would apply to, and where for other parts of the special character overlay the underlying zone would apply. But the panel took a position of seeking to have a standard which was consistent across all of the special character, that then removed that opportunity to differentiate which parts of special character had one rule and where the underlying zone would apply. So that's just one part of the region which is affected, but you can see that there are a large number of discrete areas of special character, and each of these have their own accompanying character statement that is a narrative describing the history and the values, particularly relating to streetscape of these areas. Just a few snapshots just to give you a feel for the different sorts of frontage widths we have in particular and setbacks from boundaries. Partly reflective of the age as well of the subdivisions and the mode of transport that was available at the time. So this comes to the Environment Court declaration that John's spoken to. And we are now in that situation where we do have, in many instances across the plan, clarification statements that help you to work out for a particular overlay how it does relate to a zone, but in many cases we don't. So this special character plan change is one of probably two steps that we'll need to take to actually clarify this relationship. One for special character because it relates to the largest number of resource consents, the most pressing issue that we face at the moment, but we do have a basket of other overlays which don't actually talk to the underlying zones as well as they should, which we'll look to progress. I think I've spoken to some of those. So the height to boundary is one example. Subdivision site size is another example where within the special character overlay we have minimum site sizes that range from about 400 square metres up to about 1,000 square metres, depending whereabouts in the region you are. And that is meant to prevail as the actual minimum site size that you have. But within the single house zone, which is where most of the special character does actually apply, we've got a minimum site size of 600 square metres. So in processing a consent, again, you're actually faced with, well, what is the actual minimum site size? So the solution that we're proposing today, and we're just seeking endorsement to proceed with the plan change at this point, the solution is to clarify that in general terms, the overlay will prevail over the underlying zone. That was the intention in the way that the plan was built. In doing that, though, we have identified a number of instances of where the actual matters that you'd want to consider if an infringement occurs of a rule are not entirely captured within what sits within the special character overlay. So an example is that height to boundary control that I spoke about. The underlying zone enables you to consider the amenity impacts upon the neighbours, whereas the overlay does not. Now, we do see that that is actually a valid matter. So in enabling the special character to actually prevail, and that 3 metre and 45 to be the control, we would also look to have a cross-reference to the underlying zone assessment matters for amenity in order that those effects on neighbours can be considered. So there we go, that's the suite of the specific standards that we're looking to clarify. And I think within the committee report those are explained in greater detail. And then just turning to the overall benefits from the plan change. So if you are preparing a resource consent application, you want to be clear about the rules that you actually are looking to infringe. So this is going to assist those to be able to write their assessments of environmental effects in a better way. It's going to assist the processing planners with consistency of what are the provisions that actually prevail, and it should actually also help community groups, character coalition, heritage groups, etc. to actually see that the special character overlay is, as intended, as part of the build of the plan, the prevailing set of provisions over the top of the underlying zone where there is a clash. So open through the chair for questions.
Thank you, Phil. Councillor Newman first, then Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yeah, firstly, a very well-written report. Your group, Ian, does very good reports, and thank you very much for that. So I understand the the conundrum here whereby the overlays appear to, well, they're contradicting the zoning intent. So with respect to the timing of the plan change, that's important. I've got an overlay at Hill Park in relation to trees in an established part of Hill Park. Clearly there would be a need for quite prompt clarification of this through a plan change process, because the prevailing intent of the overlay to create an exception at that location is something that we'd want to preserve as a matter of urgency. What would be the timing for this, and what would be the resourcing to ensure that we could actually give effect to that plan change, any subsequent appeals?
Yes, and timing has been front of mind for us as well, coming out of the declaration findings. So we've had a team of 4 staff, and we've also had 2 planning consultants from one of the private firms within town working pretty much full time on this for about the last 6 weeks. We're hoping to be able to hit a target date of the 6th of December to notify this plan change.
Yeah.
The issue, though, will be to make sure that this plan change is very robust. The experiences in the past of special character for Auckland City Council and for Auckland Council are that you want to get these plan changes right. So we are working very closely with legal services. We will be engaging with local boards starting at the Chairs Forum next week, and we do want to actually make sure that we are comfortable with what we're looking to notify, so that we can actually move through to get an operative set of provisions as quickly as possible.
And just as a point of clarification, I think I understand the mechanics of how you're proposing to do this, but it is one plan change to affect all the overlays, or a basket of plan changes for the individual?
No, one single plan change to focus specifically on the one overlay of the special character overlay. And so within that to address in particular those 5 or 6 standards, but also to put clarification clauses in as well, that the the overlay prevails over the underlying zone.
So just through the chair, with respect to the other overlays, we've completed the analysis, and the impacts are far less, particularly in terms of the volumes of potential resource consent applications. So it is the special character overlay that is the most significant problem. Other overlays, they're much more minor, and we're still doing that work, but that would be a separate plan change that we would bring back to the committee in the new year. We've done the work on special character. We're getting close to good to go, hopefully by the beginning of December. But for the other overlays, the analysis shows it's not as significant a problem. Some overlays are absolutely fine. Others have some minor issues. So we'd like to come back to the committee on the other overlays, but progress this special character plan change as soon as possible.
Can I just ask one final question then, Chair? If we're talking about the new year, is that a new year for advice for notification by, say, the end of March?
That sentence under next steps at the end of the committee report, I'm sorry, is a mistake. We're actually looking to notify this plan change, if we can, on the 6th of December.
Yes. Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was exactly what I was going to ask you, so thank you just for that. Could you just please take me, I have a number of heritage groups in my area, and I suppose what they're wanting to, they're a bit nervous when you start opening this ball all up again. Could you take me through the difference between option 2 and option 3, because both say that they may result in relitigation of some of the issues and policies, and so they don't they feel that they have submitted via the unitary plan process to a point, they feel. So what kind of danger is from losing some of the solid built heritage criteria that they've worked so hard to get in the plan in the first place? So could you just give me a little bit of detail between option, I know that your preferred option is option 2, and I'm not saying that's wrong, I just am wanting to know the difference that you feel is between option 2 and 3.
Well,
one's obviously a bigger piece of work.
Yeah, it's the scope issue of how wide open we're creating a policy debate. So option 3, which would be a full review of both the text and the maps of the special character, would enable for a full policy debate to actually occur with all of the associated research, all of the associated field survey work, all of the associated legal implications of challenge.
Okay, so that's why you're going for option 2, I now understand that. And the date was, you're going out in December.
That's the target date, but we do want to make sure we are very robust with what we notify, and we do need to actually close off our engagement, particularly with local boards.
Yes, so that was my next question. Are you going to get round all the local boards in time?
Well, this is the challenge that we've got at the moment, so we'll talk to the Chairs Forum next week,
Yeah.
and look to the best arrangement based on their issues that they raise.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, that's me.
Thank you. And just in terms of the options, I mean, clearly option 1 is not an option really. That's just where we are at the moment. We can't allow that to continue. So it's between 2 and 3. Can we just explore the 3 again? And you're saying that just say 3 years ago when we were going through the draft Auckland plan, we did that thoroughly anyway. What would we learn beyond what analysis that was undertaken at that time in option 3?
I actually might leave John to answer this one. There are some implications of my answer that I'd like. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, within the special character areas we have many different sub-areas, some rolled over from the Legacy North Shore Plan, Auckland City Plan, the Rodney Plan, the Manukau Plan. So, you know, there were some pragmatic positions reached during the mediation prior to the hearings on the unitary plan for those areas. And so a full-blown review is, you know, potentially opens up a whole lot of issues around exactly what should the demolitions controls be within different areas. I mean, it is a very complex exercise, so I just think it'd be a huge task. It would delay notification of the plan change for quite a considerable period of time and reopen up a whole lot of issues that are fairly well settled now, having been through the hearings. So that would be my advice.
So big risk would be delay.
Big risk would be
Then-
delay,
And then
complexity.
cost would be another risk.
Cost. And in terms of benefit, I mean, we feel that, you know, Aucklanders had a chance to have the say through the unitary plan hearings. We had a lot of submissions on the character overlay, you know, the panel made some robust recommendations, council made its decision. So, you know, we've had a pretty intensive process looking at these areas. So we think the benefits are pretty minimal of a, you know, back to basics, full-blown review of the character areas.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker?
Yeah, couple of questions. First off, can you just clarify the effect of the plan change once notified? So what standing does it have on notification?
It will not have immediate legal effect. So it is dealing with the clarification between land use matters, and it is not dealing specifically with what's called Section 6F matters, which are historic heritage matters. So under the clauses under the RMA of what enables you to have immediate legal effect, it does not meet those clauses. That's one of the other reasons that we do need to move relatively quickly on this, to ensure that there is clarity to the consenting process for when we get to that decision notice point, which is when we'll actually start to get legal effect.
And when will that be?
Well, if we notify on the 6th of December and we lengthen the period of time for public submission, given that there's a statutory holiday period, so we take submissions through till roughly the end of January, then we'll need time to prepare the summary of submissions and do the further submission process, and then prepare the officer's report to the hearing commissioners. So my guesstimate would be you'd be looking at probably June next year, I'd suggest, to actually have hearings.
Okay. And then the other question I've got, given as you pointed out that you realised there was an issue when the commissioners came out with their decisions, how is it that things took so long to come to some remedy? And I understand we had the declaration in between.
So this is the, I might actually get Ian maybe to talk to this one.
So when the decision came out from the independent hearings panel, it did become evident that there were confusion between the special house zone and the special character overlay. The process that we followed was to seek feedback from Plans and Places. We also got numerous legal opinions on what is the best interpretation. And in the end, because it wasn't clear, we opted to go for an Environment Court declaration. It was one that Council sought. And obviously the Environment Court went with an interpretation which was against what we had currently been interpreting it. So we went through a robust process to try and find a solution, recognising that planning consultants and the development community were also asking questions of us through that period.
Thank you. Councillor Casey.
Well, I just wanted to ask about the 319 cases and how this plan change relates to them. Will any of them wait?
Potentially. So to give a bit of an update on where we're at with, I might do that now. So obviously once the declaration became evident, we undertook a bit of a stock take of how many consents that would affect. Initially it was 420. We then created a team of about 13 planners to act as a call centre, make phone calls, receive phone calls from affected people. We also had a dedicated email address. Their role was to review each and every file. That reduced that number to 319. We then contacted all of those 319 via email or phone. And to date we've got about 115 consents lodged before us, and we've granted 54 of those. So we're still working through those 319 consents. Once the plan change, if depending on how that prevails, what people might do, recognising that the consent that they currently have is still valid, the old consent is still valid, because it would take a High Court judicial review to turn that over. In order to create some more comfort, they might wait for the plan change and then lodge a subsequent consent to get certainty for themselves. But it doesn't circumvent or override those existing consents.
So just while we're on that topic, Ian, I understand that Council has given a lot of support to those parties. Can you just
That's right. So we've been undertaking.
What type of support?
Predominantly we've been undertaking free pre-application advice and free consents. All of those consents I mentioned, there's no cost to the consent holder. We have been undertaking in a handful of cases a wee bit of mediation to try and resolve situations. So we're taking it extremely seriously, recognising there's the planning element to it, but there's clearly an emotional element to it as well for families and individuals.
Thank you. Thanks for doing that. Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. First of all, I just want to thank Ian and the Plans and Places team as well, just the resource consent team, because it's been a huge undertaking this, and I just want to acknowledge that how quickly they got onto this before too much damage had been done, and the compassionate way in which you've worked with our customers, I guess you call them, because it is a really difficult situation, and that we've tried to make sure there's been no extra cost for people, give them as much reassurance and really personal contact. Just noting how emotional this can be. Often your house is your biggest asset, and you've often got all your dreams and hopes wrapped up in it, and it's a place where your family lives. So I really want to acknowledge that work has been huge. So I just want to clarify in terms of this plan change is really about clarifying the process under which resource consents are processed, or the way in which, rather than relitigating, I guess definitions of heritage, where those places are, all of that, because I'm really, that's why I'm in favour of the option that's being put forward here, because public have had a huge opportunity to input in that. This is just about making sure the process is more streamlined, and in some cases I see that it's often unworkable. There could be some really perverse outcomes if we carried on without this plan change, having to look at the underlying zoning and the heritage overlay. It just becomes so difficult. And we've also had a lot of issues around speed of resource consent, so this would help speed that up. I think, if it's not so complex. Is that kind of the take on it? Is my take on it correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The main premise of the plan change is to create certainty, and there's three areas in which that will come through. One is which zone or overlay takes precedence, which standards take precedence, such as the height to boundary, so we'd only be looking at one, not two, and also to bring in the element of amenity considerations, because previously that wasn't part of our interpretation, which then brings into consideration effects on neighbours, and yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that's...
So it's really about clarifying, yeah.
I'm happy to second it if you're happy to move it, Mr Chair.
Thank you. I might leave that to Councillor Mike Lee, who has the
Okay,
next question.
good idea.
Councillor Lee, do you want to move these?
Yeah, thank you. There are a number of aspects to this problem, apart from the tidying up the technical matter, which I guess with the scale and the pace of the unitary plan, it's not surprising some things came out a little awry, and this is one case where the overlay is somewhat different from the underlying zoning, and ironically, it seems to me quite often the special character overlay is more permissive than the underlying zoning, which seems strange to me and to most people. However, a number of consents were obviously affected. I heard it was 423. I hear the figure 319. There'll be an explanation for that. But and there is concern with the people with those consents that have been declared the product of an invalid process. But there is another aspect to this, and that is affected neighbours who have not been told, who apparently are still not being considered. And I've had a number of distraught people calling me asking for help about houses next or buildings next door which are blocking out their view or their light, and nothing is done about it. And it seems to spotlight another problem with the council's administration of the Unitary Plan and the Resource Management Act, and that is, as Councillor Cooper has mentioned, we deal with the people who apply for the resource consents as our customers, and we treat the whole process as some sort of a commercial contract between us and the customer. But there's more to it than that. The Resource Management Act is a social contract. It's not between the council and individuals. It's between the council and a community, and including neighbours. And we've seemed to have drifted away from that. Section 5 of the Resource Management Act, the definition of sustainability, has at its heart people and communities, and in practice we just ignore it. So at the last Heritage Advisory Panel, the panel members were briefed by the Heritage team, and they expressed real concern and asked the council to make public all of the affected areas or addresses, so that affected neighbours have some notice of what's happening in their neighbourhood and to their property and to their property values. And I would really urge the council to do that. Otherwise, we're just inflicting an injustice on a whole lot of people, way more than the 423 or the 319 who have been inconvenienced by an invalid process. Let's make that point.
Sorry, Councillor Lee, my apology. I was just hearing something else at the end of your contribution there. But
these things happen.
Thank you. So Councillor Lee has moved it, and Councillor Cooper has seconded. Councillor Lee makes some good points. I do want to acknowledge, Ian, your team has really pulled out the stops in the last few months. You were already under pressure with the massive inflow of applications for resource consents, and you've assigned a specialist or a special team to address this. It has, as Councillor Lee, it has affected our constituents, our Aucklanders, and it's hurt a number in more ways than just financially. It's upset families, and look, we had a nuanced approach in the draft unitary plan. That changed through the decision making there. I take it, John, that your team did the right thing with Ian's team and getting legal advice and running with that legal advice, and then seeking the Environment Court declaration. I just don't know how we could have done it any better, to be honest. But it is a predicament we find ourselves in. Phil, thanks for very quickly but absolutely thoroughly preparing this work. Let's get it out there and continue to support those that are affected. I think, Ian, you are, and that has not stopped, and that will be ongoing. And the council is absolutely committed to those that have been affected, so that we can continue to offer them every support that we can to ensure we get them through this. So let's get this out there and notified, and find ourselves with a plan that is can be more easily read and applied. So thank you again to all three for your work, and it is moved and seconded, and I'll put that vote. I'll just note the change in the red members. Thank you, Councillor Lee, and an independent Māori statutory board member, together with the chair and deputy chair. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Members, we've got one more item on the agenda. I'm looking at, it's 10 to 1. Councillor Casey's back in town. And do you want to deal with this one last item, or do you want to take the lunch break now and come back to the item? Deal with it now.
Lunch break.
Take a break?
Yep.
Or, okay, is it take a break?
Please.
Take a break. We'll adjourn and we'll reconvene at 25 past 1. 25 past 1? We stand adjourned.